The elevator opened directly into his penthouse, and the first thing I heard was silence. Not the natural quiet of an empty room, the deliberate silence that descends when something has gone wrong in a way that is also, for certain people, entertaining. There were maybe 30 of them, women in gowns that cost more than my mother's car, men in suits that had been constructed rather than bought, crystal everywhere, in the glasses, the chandeliers, the sharpened angles of women who looked like they had been assembled on a blueprint of narrow and luminous. The kind of party that exists to remind you, at every angle, of what you are not. And I was not any of this. I am Celeste Beaumont. I am a size 20, with auburn hair I'd pinned carefully that evening, pale freckled skin that flushes red when I'm nervous, and green eyes that my mother always called my best feature because she was trying to give me something to hold on to. I was wearing a dress the color of red wine, deep burgundy, the nicest thing I owned, and it had looked beautiful in my bathroom mirror an hour ago. Under chandelier light, surrounded by women in $6,000 gowns, my freckled shoulders bare and my curves undeniable in every direction, I felt it, the way you feel a costume at the wrong party. Every eye in the room found me in the first 3 seconds. Some looked away, some didn't bother. A woman near the window, white blonde, collarbone like a shelf, leaned toward the man beside her and whispered behind her hand. He looked at me. Looked back at her. A smile moved between them like a private joke completing its circuit. I knew that smile. I had been the punchline of that smile my entire life. At school dances and office parties and every fashion industry event I had ever attended as the only plus-size woman in the room. The girl with the pretty face and the body nobody wanted to look at directly. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, standing in the doorway with 30 pairs of eyes deciding what I was that the man at the far end of the room was watching something entirely different. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows, dark suit, no tie, one button open. Tall and angular, early 40s, black hair going silver at the temples, a face with the particular stillness of someone who has learned to keep everything behind his eyes. Nico Ferrara. I knew the name the way everyone in this city knew it, carefully, with the instinct to lower your voice. He ran the most powerful private art acquisition firm in the country, officially. Unofficially, the things people said about Nico Ferrara were the kinds of things people said in kitchens and parking garages, never in print. He was watching me, not measuring or dismissing, something more focused, something that made me feel, for reasons I could not explain, like the only person in the room who was actually standing still. Then he moved. The room noticed. Bodies adjusted, conversations quieted, glasses paused. Nico Ferrara crossed toward me and did not look at a single other person on his way. He stopped in front of me, close enough that I could see the scar at the corner of his left eyebrow, the dark brown of his eyes that read as black in any light. "You must be my guest," he said. His voice was low, unhurried. "I think there's been a mistake," I said. My cheeks were warm. They always gave me away, that pale skin flushing rose at the slightest provocation. I was told this was a styling consultation. Something moved behind his eyes, not surprise, recognition, of a shape he had already assembled before I spoke. "There's no mistake." He extended his hand, palm up, the gesture of a man who opens doors rather than pushes through them. "You're here. That's what matters." The room was so quiet I could hear ice shifting in someone's glass. I looked at his hand, scarred knuckles, no rings. I looked at his face and found nothing I could name as pity, and I was fluent in pity, had been reading it since I was 9 years old at a birthday party I turned around and walked away from. This wasn't pity. I placed my hand in his. He led me through the room without looking at anyone in it. He brought me to the best chair near the windows, the one that faced everything, and he waited while I sat. Then he sat beside me. "Matteo," he said to the man on his left without preamble, "you were telling me about the Zurich shipment." Conversation resumed, but the air had been rearranged. Every person in that room had watched Nico Ferrara receive me as though I had been his choice all along. And because his choices were not questioned, only observed, the room absorbed this and adjusted. They didn't understand it. I could feel their confusion like static. I didn't understand it either. But I was sitting in the best chair in the room. The white blonde woman's smile had gone somewhere it couldn't be retrieved from, and the only thing I knew for certain was that I was still there. For now, that was enough. I had not been sent here as a guest. I figured that out within the first 10 minutes, the way you figure out most things when you've spent a lifetime learning to read rooms before rooms read you first. I was a junior stylist at Beaumont and Reed, not my family's agency, just a coincidence my supervisor Renata found quietly hilarious. 3 years with the firm. I was good at my job. I understood clothes the way some people understand music. Not as coverings, but as language. The first sentence a person speaks before they open their mouth. Renata had called me that morning, last minute. A client event, she said. Private, upscale, a chance to make connections. "Wear something nice," she'd said. I should have asked why she was sending me instead of herself. I should have asked why the invitation came through personal email. I should have asked a great many things. I didn't, because Renata had a way of making questions feel like ingratitude. What I understood now, sitting in a room full of people who had been expecting someone else, was that Renata had known exactly what she was doing. She had sent me the way you send something absurd into a serious room, to make the serious people laugh, to see what happened when a pale, freckled, size 20 woman from a studio apartment in Queens walked into a world built for a different shape of person entirely. She had been counting on Nico Ferrara to look through me. He had looked at me instead. I was still thinking about this when Nico leaned toward me, quietly, so only I could hear. "You're not eating." I looked at the plate in front of me. Small, beautiful bites of things that smelled extraordinary. "I am eating." "You're moving food around." He was watching the room, that lighthouse attention present in all directions at once. "There's a difference." "That's a strange thing to notice." "I notice most things." He picked up his own fork. "You don't like the beef?" Wagyu, with a reduction pushed slightly too far, just to the edge of bitter. "The beef is excellent," I said. "The sauce is over-reduced. Someone was managing too many components and pulled it a few seconds too late." Silence. I set down my fork. That had escaped without my permission, the way real thoughts do when held too long. My skin was warm, the flush crawling up my throat in the way I hated at moments like this. Nico turned to look at me, fully, for the first time. "You cook," he said. "I used to. My grandmother had a restaurant in Lyon. I grew up in her kitchen." I kept my voice even. "I live in a studio apartment now. I make pasta and try not to think about it." "What would you have done with the sauce?" "Pulled it earlier. small knob of cold butter off the heat. Let the fat carry the sweetness instead of the reduction. The beef is too good to fight with the sauce. I'm sorry, that was unsolicited. It was accurate. The corner of his mouth moved, the thing that precedes a smile. I don't trust people who eat without paying attention. It means they're not really present. Maybe they're just polite. Politeness is often just inattention with better manners. I looked at him. He looked at me, at my green eyes, at the flush still high on my cheekbones, without looking away. For the first time since the elevator opened, I felt something other than the desire to disappear. The rest of dinner passed in fragments I'd later struggle to reassemble. He asked about Leon. I told him about my grandmother, Odette, who had run her brasserie on the principle that a meal was a conversation, and that you could tell everything about a person by whether they ate with their full attention. He asked why I'd left. I told him the truth, that Odette had died 3 years ago, and the restaurant had died with her, and I'd come here because I needed to be somewhere that didn't feel like a place something essential had been removed from. He was quiet for a moment. Grief does that, he said. Empties the geography. You sound like you know. I do. He didn't elaborate. I didn't push. When the room began to empty, guests taking their leave with the careful deference of people who understood the correct way to exit Nico Ferrara's presence was quietly. The white blonde woman passed behind my chair. She paused, looked at Nico, looked at me, at my auburn hair slightly loosening from its pins, my pale, freckled arms, my burgundy dress on my large body, and then at Nico again, as though searching for the calculation she had missed. She didn't find it. When the room was nearly empty, Nico said, "Someone sent you here as a joke." I'm beginning to think so. Not beginning. You knew when you walked in. I watched you know. He looked at me steadily. And you stayed. I didn't know how to leave. You knew exactly how to leave. You chose not to. Those are different things. The truth of it settled over me like something warm I hadn't asked for and didn't know how to return. Whoever did this, he said, his voice flattened to that specific register, thought I would send you away. Yes. They were wrong. 3 words, flat as a ruled line. Outside, the city blazed in its usual indifferent way, and I sat in his best chair with the flush finally fading from my cheeks and tried to understand why being chosen by a man who didn't have to choose you felt, after a lifetime of not being chosen, like something almost too heavy to carry. He called the next morning. I was in my kitchen in yesterday's clothes, auburn hair loose and tangled, making coffee with the focused attention of someone who needs one small thing done correctly before facing anything larger. There's a restaurant on the Ile Saint-Louis, he said without greeting. Chef from Burgundy who trained under someone your grandmother would have respected. Dinner tonight, 7 o'clock. I leaned against the counter. Outside my studio window, the city was gray and ordinary. You didn't ask. No. That's going to be something we discuss. I know. A pause, the barely perceptible beat of a man who has power over most things choosing, in this one moment, to ask instead of arrange. Will you come? It was that pause that made me say yes. I spent most of the day thinking about Renata. She hadn't called to check on me, hadn't texted. She had sent me into that room like a stone thrown into water and was now, presumably, waiting for the ripple report. I thought about the brightness in her voice when she said, "Wear something nice," the blade edge of it catching light. I needed to understand exactly what had been done before I decided what to do about it. That was how I had always worked, without rushing toward reaction, because reactions that arrive too early always arrive wrong. Chez Armand was everything he'd promised. Low ceilings, amber light, tables spaced for real conversation. The chef came out when we arrived, not for Nico, but for the occasion of someone who might understand the food, which Nico had apparently communicated in advance. I tested the theory by mentioning that his amuse-bouche had a miso component fermented slightly longer than standard, giving it an umami depth most guests would miss entirely. The chef looked at me for a long moment, at my green eyes, my pale, freckled face, my large, soft body in the dark blue dress I'd chosen because I liked it, and then smiled the real kind of smile. He disappeared back into his kitchen. "He'll cook differently now," Nico said. "He'll cook the same. He'll just believe it matters more." That's not the same as the same. I looked at him across the table. He was easier to look at in smaller rooms. The penthouse had required vigilance, too much performance in every direction. Here, he was simply a man in a good jacket, reading a menu he'd clearly seen before. "Why me?" I said. He looked up. "I mean, last night. You knew what the room expected. You chose something that surprised them. Why?" "Because they were wrong." That's a correction, not a reason. Something moved in his eyes, closer to a smile than anything I'd seen from him. I grew up in a room full of people who decided what things were worth before they looked at them, he said. I learned early that those people miss everything important. He set down the menu. You walked into a room designed to make you feel small. Your cheeks went red, and you sat down and talked about sauce reduction. That tells me more about who you are than anything else in that room. I talk about food when I'm nervous. I know. That's the point. What comes out of people when they're frightened is the truth of them. I thought about that. About a pale, flushed woman in a burgundy dress, blurting opinions about Wagyu to the most dangerous man in the room. "And what truth did you see?" I asked. "Someone paying attention," he said, "when everyone else was watching to see if you'd break." The food was extraordinary. We ate with the focused pleasure of two people who understood that eating together is a form of honesty. We talked about Lyon and about this city and about the difference between things that are beautiful and things that are merely expensive. He talked about a painting acquired in Turin with the reverence of a man describing a conversation that had changed him. And I found myself leaning forward without deciding to, the way you lean toward warmth. Walking back from the restaurant, the city easy and dark around us, he said, "I'd like to see you again." "You're asking this time." "I'm asking." "Then yes," I said. He nodded once. In the streetlight, I could see him file it somewhere. This small, ordinary yes, with the same care he gave everything. As though it mattered. As though I was not a person who had to prove her right to matter, but one who simply did. I thought about the birthday party when I was 9 years old, the window I'd looked through and the long walk home afterward, alone, in a dress my mother had thought was pretty enough to change things. I had been waiting a long time to stop making that walk. I went home and didn't sleep, but not because I was afraid. Because something had opened, and the air coming through it was new. Renata called on a Thursday. I'd been waiting for it the way you wait for weather you can already smell. I let it ring twice. "How did it go Saturday?" The brightness was back, brittle now, with the specific curiosity of a person who set a trap and is pulling back the branch to see what it caught. "It went," I said. "I heard Ferrara was there. I heard it was quite an evening." "I hope you didn't embarrass the agency." There it was. I had spent 4 days deciding how this conversation would go. In the end, the words came without ceremony. "You sent me there knowing what it was," I said. "Not a consultation, a companion placement. You sent me because you thought he would look at a fat white woman from Queens and I would walk out humiliated and you would have a story to tell." "Celeste, I don't know what you think. I think you put me in that room as a joke. I think you've been putting me in rooms as a joke for 3 years, and I have been grateful every time because I was taught that getting the invitation was enough, even when the invitation was designed to hurt me." I kept my voice even. My hands were steady against the phone. "I am done being grateful for things that were never gifts." "You'll still be compensated for the evening," she said, her voice gone careful. "I know. And then I'll be looking for other representation." I hung up. I sat in my studio for a long time after. The city outside the window, my auburn hair still loose from sleep, pale hands flat on the kitchen table. There is a particular quiet that follows the thing you cannot unsay, and it is not comfortable, but it is clean. Nico called that evening. "You're quiet," he said. "I had a day." "Tell me." I told him about Renata. No performance, no borrowed anger, just the facts in the order they happened, presented the way you present something when you've decided it deserves to be taken seriously. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, the silence on his end had the quality of something being decided. "What would you like to do about it?" he said. "I've already done it. I left." That took courage. It took 12 years of being too tired to keep being afraid. I leaned back against the window. "I'm more interested in what comes next." "What comes next is that you don't go back to a room that treated you as a prop, and you find one that treats you as what you are." "Which is?" "The person in the room who is actually paying attention." I closed my eyes for a moment. "That's a very careful answer," I said. "It's an honest one." "Nico." "Yes?" "What am I to you?" Not combatively. A real question asked plainly, because I had spent too much of my life accepting things that were never named, and I was too old for that now. The pause he gave it was long enough to be serious. "Something I didn't expect," he said. "And something I don't intend to be careless with." I sat with that. "Okay," I said. "Okay," he said. We talked for another hour. He told me about his mother in Palermo, who had never owned more than one good knife and believed it was sufficient. About the painting in Turin. About growing up in a building that smelled like diesel and salt water. The exhaustion of men who worked with their bodies for other men's profit. He told me once, very quietly, that he had decided at 17 he would never again be the smallest person in a dangerous room. "And are you?" I asked. "No," he said, simply, without pride. "Does it help?" I asked. "Having the power?" "It helps with most things," he said. "Not all of them." I did not ask what it didn't help with. I filed the shape of it away, the particular weight on those 4 words, and kept it somewhere careful. Because I understood already that Nico Ferrara did not offer those words to many people, and I did not intend to waste them. His mother was named Carmela, and she lived in a 3rd-floor apartment above a dry cleaner in a part of the city that had nothing to do with penthouses or chandeliers. Nico brought me on a Sunday evening 3 weeks after the party, without announcement. The building smelled like steam and other people's fabric. The elevator was small and slow. Nico stood in it with the particular stillness of someone standing at the edge of something he cannot fully control. Such a departure from every other version of him I had seen that I noticed it immediately. "She'll ask you direct questions," he said. "I'm not afraid of direct questions." "She won't apologize for them." "I'm not afraid of unapologetic women." He looked at me sideways. Something in his face shifted, younger, briefly. The boy from the diesel and saltwater building showing for a moment before the man reassembled. Carmela Ferrara was 73, small and immovable, with Nico's dark eyes in the hands of a woman who had worked with them for 50 years. She opened the door before we knocked. She looked at me for a long time, at my auburn hair, my pale, freckled face, the soft roundness of my arms in my cotton dress, the full curve of my body that no amount of careful dressing had ever successfully minimized or hidden. She took all of it in without the sliding away look I had learned to brace for. "You're not what I expected," she said. "What did you expect?" "The last one was a model." She said model the way you say decorative. "Come in. I made food. Don't tell me if it's wrong." The apartment was small and full. Photographs on every surface. Nico as a boy, thin, watchful. His father, same jaw. Carmela herself in a yellow dress outside a church, laughing with her whole body. She sat me at the kitchen table and put food in front of me without asking, and then asked me everything. Where was I from? What did my parents do? What did I do? Why had I left Lyon? Did I think her son worked too much? Did I think what he did was wrong? That last one she asked, looking directly at me, and Nico, standing in the doorway with his coffee, went very still. "I think," I said, "that people make the choices available to them, and that the choices your son has made have kept him alive and kept you safe, and put him in a position to do things that matter. I think there are many ways to be a good person, and not all of them are tidy. I also think that's a question you should ask him." Carmela looked at her son. He was looking at me with something I had not seen on him before, something that had come apart slightly from its usual arrangement, open, unguarded, there for only a moment before he pulled it back. "I've asked him," Carmela said. "He gives me the same answer every time." She looked back at me. "Your answer is better." She reached across the table and took my hand. Her grip was extraordinary. The grip of a woman who has wrung out grief like wet cloth and held a family together with nothing but her own 2 hands. "He doesn't bring people here," she said, loud enough for Nico to hear. "In 15 years, he has not brought a single person to this table." She squeezed my hand and looked at my pale fingers in her brown ones. "You, I like." After dinner, braised chicken with preserved lemon, simple and perfect. We walked back slowly, Nico's hands in his pockets, the city doing its nighttime things. "Your mother is extraordinary," I said. "She terrifies most people." "She's honest. That's not the same thing." He was quiet for a long time. His jaw had the set of a man thinking about something he hasn't decided to say yet. "She was right," he said, "about not bringing people." "Why not?" "Because bringing someone here means they matter. and the things that matter to me are the things that can be used against me. He looked at me then. I've been careful about that for a very long time. And now? He held my gaze. Now I'm being careful in a different way, he said. We stood on the sidewalk outside his mother's building, steam rising from the dry cleaner's grate, the city moving around us in its indifferent motion. Something settled between us, not decided, not named, but present, the way a season is present before you can call it by name. Take me home, I said. Yes, he said. And neither of us meant the place. I almost left in the 5th week. Not because he had done something wrong, because I wasn't afraid of him at all. And the absence of that fear had started to alarm me in a way the actual danger had not. It started with the charity gala, a fashion industry fundraiser, the kind of event I had spent 3 years attending as staff and was now attending as Nico Ferrara's guest, which were 2 categorically different positions in the same room. As staff, I had moved through those rooms like furniture, unregarded, useful, invisible in the way things are invisible when they serve a function. As his guest, I was visible in a way I had no practice for, visible and assessed. Every woman in that room had been assembled from the same narrow template, and I was a size 20 with auburn hair and freckled, pale shoulders, and a body that fashion had spent decades pretending did not exist. They looked at me the way the industry had always looked at me, as a mistake someone had made. I wore a gown I had chosen myself, midnight blue, structured at the waist, a neckline my mother would have called dramatic. I stood in front of my mirror that morning and made myself look, really look, at the pale, round, freckled woman in the glass, at the auburn hair I'd worn loose for once, at the green eyes that were, in fact, rather good. I went anyway. Nico met me at the entrance and looked at me the way he had looked at me since the elevator, slow and specific, reading a page he didn't want to rush through. Blue was the right choice, he said. I know, I said. Inside, the room did what rooms like this did, assessed, found me outside the expected parameters, the conversations that didn't quite include me, the looks that slid away, the seating arrangements that placed me at a careful distance from every center of importance. I had been the fat girl at the industry party for 12 years. I knew every version of this room. Then a woman named Valentina Greco, editor of the city's most prominent fashion editorial, thin as a blade, dressed like a statement, stopped beside Nico and looked at me with the smooth precision of someone who has been powerful for so long that cruelty feels like candor. Nico, how adventurous of you. The room in our radius went quiet. Nico removed her hand from his arm. Small gesture, unhurried, final. Valentina, he said. The way you say a word to end a sentence that should not have started. I only meant, I know what you meant. He turned his full attention to her, and I had seen him give that attention to things before, but I had not yet seen him give it as a weapon. Celeste is here because I want her here. The reasons for that are not available for commentary. A pause. The pause of a man selecting the weight of his last sentence. From anyone. Valentina left. Nico turned back to me. His expression was level. You didn't need me to do that, he said. No. I know. He handed me a glass from a passing tray. I wanted to. There's a line, I said. between defending me and deciding for me. Yes. Which side was that? He thought about it, genuinely. The first one, he said. But I'd want you to tell me if I crossed. I would, I said. And you'd stop. Yes, he said. I would stop. We stayed 2 hours. By the end, 3 people had sought me out, not with the careful courtesy of obligation, but with the genuine curiosity of individuals who had updated their assessment and wanted something from the result. In the car going home, I was quiet. You're thinking about leaving, Nico said. I looked at him. I considered it, I said. Before we went in, I stood in front of my mirror in this dress, and I thought about how that room would look at me. At my arms, my waist, everything that doesn't fit their idea of who belongs there. And I thought about whether I wanted to give them the opportunity. What made you come? I thought about it honestly. You, I said. And the fact that deciding not to come would have been me making myself small for people who don't deserve that kind of power over me. I looked at my hands in my lap. I have been making myself small my whole life. I walked into that penthouse hunched forward like an apology. I have been shrinking in rooms since I was 9 years old. I looked up. I'm tired of the discount. He was quiet for a long time. The city moved past the windows. For the record, he said, yes. I have never once looked at you and seen something that required accommodation. He held my gaze. I have looked at you and seen the most honest person in every room you've walked into. That is what I see. That is all I have ever seen. My chest was not quiet. I know, I said. I want you to know I've known it since the elevator. Nico. Yes. Take me home, I said. And this time, I was entirely clear about which one I meant. He cooked for me for the first time on a Tuesday. Not a restaurant, his kitchen, which was large and serious and stocked by someone who understood the difference between herbs that are fresh and herbs that are correct. I arrived to find him in a cook's apron with his sleeves rolled up and a pan already going. You don't have to perform this, I said. I'm not performing. He didn't look up. My grandmother taught me. She said a man who couldn't feed the people he cared about was a man who had outsourced something he should keep. I sat on the kitchen counter. He didn't ask me to, but he didn't ask me not to, and the kitchen had the quality of a room where being comfortable was allowed. It was carbonara. 3 ingredients, which is either the simplest or most difficult number, depending on how much you understand what you're doing. He worked with the quiet focus of someone who has done this enough times that the action is instinct, not performance. I watched him and thought about Odette, who had said the same thing about bread, that you could not pretend your way through it, that the dough knew the difference between attention and technique. You said it doesn't help with everything, I said. He was twisting pasta onto plates. The power, I said. You said it helps with most things, not all. He set the plates on the kitchen table, sat across from me. The pasta was perfect, the emulsification exact, the pepper toasted, assembled with the confidence of a man who knows that 3 right things are better than 10 approximate ones. Loneliness, he said finally. I waited. You cannot build your way out of it. You cannot acquire your way out of it. I have tried both. He looked at his plate, then at me. Every room I walk into rearranges itself around me. People perform. They show me what they think I need to see. You walked into my room and talked about sauce reduction because you were nervous, and that was what came out. You were not performing. I'm always nervous at parties. I know. He held my gaze. That's why I trust you. I looked at him across the kitchen table. He was a man who ran things that were not entirely legal, who had decided at 17 he would never be the smallest person in a dangerous room, who had not brought anyone to his mother's table in 15 years. And he had just told me, in the flattest possible voice, that he trusted me. I'm not uncomplicated, I said. I know. I have a history of making myself invisible when things get difficult. I know that too. And you're still Celeste. I'm aware of all of it. I'm asking anyway. I sat with that. The particular weight of being fully seen and asked for anyway, which is nothing like being accepted despite something, and everything like being wanted because of the whole of it. My mother used to say I apologized for taking up space, I said. My pale hands were wrapped around my wine glass. She said it was the biggest lie anyone had ever sold me. She was right. I'm still learning that. I know. He reached across the table and put his hand over mine. The simple, deliberate gesture of a man who has decided this matters and is choosing to show it without theater. Learn it here. I turned my hand in his and held it. Outside, the city moved. The pasta cooled. The kitchen held us in its warm, ordinary light, and I thought, this is the most dangerous thing I have ever done. And then, good. Because safe had not been sufficient, and insufficient things have their own quiet cost, and I had been paying it for too long. The confrontation with Renata happened at a press preview 6 weeks after I left the agency. I had not been looking for it. I had been doing something I had not done in 3 years, attending an industry event as myself. Not as anyone's assistant, not as the plus-size woman they kept for diversity optics, but as Celeste Beaumont, recently independent, building something new from the freedom of no longer performing gratitude for people who offered none in return. I had found new clients, small at first, a ceramicist, a restaurateur. Word had moved the way word moves when quality is real. I was doing work that asked something of me, rather than simply asking me to disappear. Renata appeared near the canapes with the confident stride of someone who has never been held accountable. Celeste! Bright. I heard you've been busy. I have. I also heard you've been seeing Ferrara. She tilted her head. I never would have guessed. No, I said. You wouldn't have. Because you sent me there expecting him to send me away. You sent me because you thought a man like that would look at a fat, pale, ordinary woman from Queens and... I stopped. The words were jagged in my throat, and I refused to bleed in front of her. You know exactly what you thought. The warmth in her face relocated, from genuine to performed, a shift I had learned to read years before I had language for it. I did you a favor. I gave you access to a room you'd never have entered otherwise. You gave me access to a room full of people waiting to laugh. You did it because you thought it would be funny. Because you have spent 3 years watching me make myself small in rooms, and you wanted to see me made smaller. I held her gaze. I am done being the person you feel better standing next to. I walked away. My hands were shaking. My heart was loud. But my back was straight and my chin was up, and behind me I could hear the silence I left in my wake. The same kind of silence that had filled Nico's penthouse the night he crossed the room toward me. Except this time, I was the one who had made it. Nico was waiting outside. I hadn't asked him to be. He simply was. A man who paid attention to things before they needed paying attention to. He looked at my face, my flushed, pale cheeks, my eyes bright from the adrenaline of having said the true thing at last. "Done?" he said. "Done." He fell into step beside me, didn't ask what had been said, just the ordinary presence of someone whose company I had come to understand as something I did not want to do without. We walked for a while, the city easy and dark. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Tell me." "There are people who are not pleased about you. People in my world who think that who I spend time with is information, who are drawing conclusions." His voice was careful. "This may become complicated." "How complicated?" "The kind that requires attention." He looked at me. "I wanted you to know. I don't want you inside something without understanding its dimensions." I thought about that, about what it meant, practically, to be attached to a man whose world moved in the dark. "What do you need from me?" I asked. "Nothing you haven't already given. I need you to know the risk, and I need you to make your own decision about it." "I make my own decisions." "I know." The corner of his mouth. "It's one of the things Yes, I know." I looked at him for a long time. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Celeste." "I've thought about it. I thought about it at the gala, and at your kitchen table, and every day for 6 weeks, because I don't step into things without understanding them." I held his gaze. "I'm not leaving." Something moved through his expression, the rare, unguarded version of him, the one that appeared sometimes in the kitchen or on his mother's street. He reached up and took my face in his hands, carefully, the way you hold something you have decided is yours to protect. His thumbs brushed my cheekbones, the pale skin, the freckles, the flush still high from the confrontation. "You are the first thing in a very long time," he said, "that I'm afraid of losing." "Then don't lose me." He kissed me, careful and deliberate, not tentative, chosen. The way you choose something when you are fully aware of its weight and choose it anyway, which is the only way anything real gets chosen. When he pulled back, he looked at me in the way he had since the elevator, as though I were worth the full cost of his attention. "Come home," he said. "Yes," I said. We did not have a wedding in a ballroom. We had a Sunday afternoon in Carmela's apartment. 40 people, food she'd been making since Thursday, a small argument about whether the tiramisu had enough espresso. It did not. And Carmela, who settled it by threatening to make everyone eat it standing at the counter. I wore ivory, a dress I had designed myself, structured and soft, made for a body like mine, not draped over it as an afterthought. It fit the way a sentence fits when every word is in its right position. My mother cried from the moment I walked in. Not the performative crying of occasions, but the deep, relieved crying of a woman who had watched her daughter apologize for existing for 32 years and was watching her stop. Carmela held my face in both hands before the ceremony and said, You're going to argue with him. Frequently, I said. Good. He needs it. She let me go. You'll be fine. Nico was at the end of the hallway with his hands clasped and his face arranged in the particular stillness I now knew was not distance, but its opposite. The look of a man feeling something he has not yet found the architecture to contain. When he saw me, the stillness broke. Just briefly. Just enough. That was all I needed. That evening, after everyone had gone and Carmela's apartment was quiet, I stood in the small bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. A size 20 white woman in an ivory dress, auburn hair escaping its pins, green eyes bright, pale, freckled skin flushed from the warmth and the wine and the laughing. Makeup slightly undone. Soft everywhere that the industry had told me I should be hard. I did not look away. I did not catalog what was wrong. I did not perform the ritual inventory of everything that took up too much space or failed the standard handed to me by rooms that never deserved to set it. I did not look at my pale, round arms and wish them narrower, or at my freckled shoulders and wish them sharper. I looked at myself the way Odette had taught me to look at a finished dish, not for what was missing, but for what was there. It was enough. I had always been enough. The world had simply taken its time catching up. Nico appeared in the doorway behind me, jacket off, sleeves rolled, the scar on his left hand catching the light. He looked at my reflection. "What do you see?" he said. I thought about the elevator, the room full of silence and crystal, and people who had already decided what I was worth. A man who crossed that room without looking at a single one of them and stopped in front of me and offered his hand. "Someone who stayed," I said. He crossed the small room and put his arms around me from behind, his chin at my temple, his dark eyes meeting my green ones in the mirror. "You stayed," he said, "and I chose, and neither of us is finished." Outside, the city moved in its ordinary way. Somewhere in it, the people who had whispered were still drawing their conclusions. The world Nico moved in was still dark at its edges. The complications were still present, still moving. None of it was resolved. All of it was ours. I looked at us in the mirror. A man who had decided that the most dangerous thing he could do was want something real. And a pale, freckled, auburn-haired woman who had spent her whole life being told she was too much and had finally, irreversibly, stopped believing it. And I thought, this is not a fairy tale. It is better than that. It is a true thing, imperfect and chosen, built by two people who showed up and kept showing up, and cost them both something to reach. The light in the mirror was warm. I did not look away. Thank you so much for 100 followers. I genuinely appreciate every single one of you being here and sharing this story with me. As a little thank you, I've written a free extra chapter set after their marriage, and it's now available on my Patreon. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from and what you think about the story.